We're getting all the stage production right here, and I have to share this on Facebook. So let me know when we're all going. I can hear myself, Bill. Can you hear yourself?
I think so. Yes, I sure can.
Let's see here. Here we go.
We are live.
Okay, we are live. So it's not popping up yet. Let's see. Okay.
Steve, I think I'll start talking
Okay, I can share.
while you're looking for us.
There we go. I got to share on Facebook. So all your questions will be seen by millions of my followers. So here we go.
I want to welcome you all tonight. My name is Bonnie Wolf. I'm on the board of the Hill Center. And this is going to be a fun night. And I want to very much thank Fresh Farm Markets, which really helped us get the word out. And I hope some of you are here for that. Steve Clemons is Washington editor-at-large for The Atlantic magazine and the editor of Atlantic Live. He's also a senior fellow at the New America Foundation, DC political think tank, and we're really happy to have him here.
Thank you.
And have Atlantic Live at the Hill Center. And he will be in conversation, excuse my back here, with Dr. Bill Schindler. And Bill has been an old friend of the Hill Center since we first opened. He's taught some wildly popular classes in foraging, fats, and fermentation. And has anyone here taken a class from Bill?
Wow.
Oh, great.
They're always sold out.
Took a class.
Yeah.
No, I would say you took a class and survived.
Exactly. Have any of you not been to the Hill Center before? Oh, wow.
Yeah, a lot of new
Please come back. And well, Bill is now the director of the Eastern Shore Food Lab and an associate professor of anthropology at Washington College in Chestertown, Maryland. But that doesn't really tell the story about Bill. He mentioned tonight that just before he came here, he was elbow deep in cow guts, where he was digging around for rennet to make cheese. And I've heard better titles for him, like Primitivist Chef and Professor Caveman. He was the star of a National Geographic reality show called The Great Human Race, where for 7 months on and off, he wore animal skins, lived in a tree, and ate raw bone marrow. And just as prehistoric people did. And in the classroom, he wants students to have an experience of what it was like to live in prehistoric times. So they find stones to make tools, to butcher meat, that they cook, and they tan the hides to make clothes. Kind of gives new meaning to back to basics. There's the Anthropology Club at Washington College has an annual Halloween insect bake sale. Last year, Bill was in Europe with his family, working with chefs, food producers, foragers, hunters, and others to learn how to fuse understanding of the last 3 or so million years of dietary history with modern culinary techniques. And we'll hear all about that tonight and learn how to eat like humans again.
Very much. Thank you. And good to what a wonderful introduction. I can't add more to that other than to say that it's been a pleasure. My husband happens to teach at Washington College in Chestertown on the Eastern Shore, and I met Bill and his kids and his wife through that. And whenever I'm running into the kids, they're fishing or spearing deer in my yard or something like that. We had Bill over. I'll never forget. We had a different home at that time, and they came over, and I didn't know what Bill was up to, but he was out in our yard just gathering stuff, and I thought it was slightly bizarre. But he was gathering pine cones and mushrooms that I didn't know were such cool things. And then I think you baked us all sorts of muffins and treats out of what you had correct out of the acorns and mushrooms, which have been great. And now whenever I see an interesting mushroom, I post it on Facebook and say, Bill, what, will I die if I, if I eat it? But of course, I am at the Atlantic, and we had a wonderful profile of Bill last year in the pages of the Atlantic called Professor Caveman. And it was really, a brief and wonderful treatment of the creativity and magic of this man who has brought us back to a lot of questions, I think, about how maybe we have culturally evolved in certain ways, but certainly we've grown more distance. There's a substantial gap. These are my words, not his. We're going to have a discussion about it, but a substantial gap between how we used to eat, what our strategies to eat were, how it meant to eat, all of those things, and where we are today. And so, Bill, thank you for joining us. Let me just open up, and I'd love to hear, how you think I would have done 50,000 years ago. And give us the dashboard of what it was like, because you've gone back. I mean, when I read our piece about you, when I read National Geographic, you basically said, 6 million years ago, man began to walk, come out of the light, begin to, consider different ways to survive. And, 300,000 years ago, you told me, as we've discussed, we essentially have not biologically evolved since that time. So how would I have done 300,000 years ago, given your knowledge of me and my character?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Well, charisma and the ability to speak has always been an important thing. So I think you would have done just fine. Absolutely.
But I mean, but people were weak creatures in the competitive environment back then.
And we still are. I mean, I think in order to have this conversation, there's a couple things we have to fully understand to lay the groundwork. And these are things that have been important for 300,000 years and even longer. We as humans, and this is a hard thing to hear, but we are one of the weakest species on the planet, period, bar none. And we have a very difficult time getting food. I mean, think about it. If we took, even if you had the knowledge base of somebody like Bear Grylls or Survivor Man, and we threw you out in the middle of the woods, nobody on this planet could feed themselves to support the bodies that we've created, over millions of years. So we have a very difficult time getting food. In fact, when we first stood up somewhere between 5 and 7 million years ago, we were only frugivores, herbivores, eating, vegetables and fruits, wild vegetables and fruits, which is obviously a seasonal thing, and maybe some insects. So our bodies and our brains, which is the most nutritionally expensive organ in our body, were relatively small and stayed that way because the diet's only supported, this size. We can't get food very easily without tools. And the other part of the conversation, which is even more important, is that we have one of the least efficient digestive tracts of any animal on the planet. So even when we can get food, our ability to take it from our mouths and then spread nutrition throughout our bodies is really compromised. We can't do a very, very good job of it. So the story that I'd really like us to talk about tonight, and the most important story that I think we can have or can hear, is the story of our dietary past, which is focused on us creating behavior patterns and technologies that allow us to extract resources from our environment and transform those resources into something that our bodies can handle.
That's what you call the food evolution revolution.
That's the food evolution revolution.
So I mean, that's a great catchphrase. So is let's eat like humans again. I mean, I've been looking at your hashtags on Twitter. But when it comes to food evolution, and you kind of talking about that, let's just stay in the past for a moment. How did, from your archaeological and anthropological research, because I know that you combine these fields, have you seen the big leaps that we did go from being the weakest species to crowding nutrients better, if you will, back then, and that now we do it at Whole Foods?
Well, actually, I have a prop. So
okay, good.
So, and this really became, real for me when we were doing I'm sure we'll talk about it later, the National Geographic show, Great Human Race. But we were set in Tanzania and supposed to be living life like our ancestors were living 2.5 million years ago, using only the tools that our ancestors at that time had. And we hadn't eaten, my co-star Kat Bigney and I hadn't eaten in days at this point. A little bit of honey from a stingless bees and a little bit of baobab fruit, which is not very filling. Anyhow, we're literally starving more than I ever had before. And we came across a dead animal. We were out on the savannah, and we were carrying a tool with us at the time. And it was a tool that was very much like this. And we had a limited amount of time to go in and get as much food from this animal as we could. And at that point, whatever had killed it had taken out all the organs and all the good stuff anyhow. And there was some meat, and we could bust open some bones for marrow. And I've taught about this for 20 years, but never had I been in the situation where going in and having a tool really made the difference in that moment between getting a little bit of something I could just gnaw on, or actually taking massive amounts of food or significant amounts of food and bringing them back with me. So this tool, this is what started it all. This is the beginning of the revolution, right? So this is a resin cast of an almost 3.5 million year old tool from just west of Lake Turkana in Kenya. And this is a cast of the first tool our ancestors ever made, at least the ones that we had found at this point. And it may not look like much, but when whoever picked this up and struck it, was some sort of Australopithecine like this, struck two rocks together and produced this flake, everything changed literally in that moment. It took less than a second to make this tool, but no longer was the person the individual who made this tool limited by these really weak nails and these really weak teeth, right, to slice and to dice and to cut and to chop and to butcher and to dig. All of a sudden, they've transcended these limitations and could interact with our environment in completely new ways. And that's really the beginning. It starts here, and now one of my favorite things in my kitchen right now is a Vitamix. I mean, a life-changing appliance if anybody has one. And that's really the same sort of thing. You're taking and augmenting or overcoming all these limitations and getting food in very important, unique ways. And that is the beginning. And really, in many ways, the beginning of us domesticating ourselves to the point where we can no longer live or survive without technologies. We need them.
And how did the bone marrow go?
Well, that's great. So I love bone marrow. I'm sure people in this room have eaten bone marrow. But if you have,
most people in Chestertown who know you have by now.
Actually, they have. But it's always been warm.
I don't know if it gets further beyond that.
That bone marrow was raw.
Yeah.
And so when I tell my students, I always ask, what is it like to eat raw bone marrow? Because warm bone marrow is amazing. Raw bone marrow, this is what I tell them. So, when you go to the dentist and you really haven't flossed for a year, but you really think you need to that one moment before you go to the dentist. So you floss, and inevitably right away your gums just bleed a little bit because you haven't flossed in a whole year. So you got a little bit of bleeding gums, and then if you bit into a stick of cold butter, that's exactly the experience of eating cold butter.
Wow.
Descriptive.
And you survived.
I survived.
So why? Let me just ask you the bottom line here. Why is this important now that we have succeeded, that we have been able to take our weak nails and our slow speed and translate that into supermarkets and farms and sort of mega opportunities for food feeding all? And I realize, and I'll tell you, and I know there are lots of places in the world, but we have the capacity to feed all if we wanted to, or if we could and we were more thoughtful about it. But that has happened. What have we grown distant from that you became close to when you were in Africa?
Well, really the focus. So the focus for those 3.5 million years has started with this tool all the way up until, I would say, maybe the Industrial Revolution, really, but has been on nutrient density. Getting the most amount, using these technologies and developing new ones and behavior patterns to get the most amount with the least amount of work. I mean, that has been the focus. It's always been, how can I get the most nutrients possible and transform them into something that my body can make use of, right? So it's the exact opposite now. Nowadays, when we think about how we are going to eat, and I'm sure everybody in this room has felt this, maybe felt it today. You want to eat all day long and not get fat. I mean, that's what modern Western people want to do. I mean, and when you think about, and you say the word diet, and going on a diet, I'm going to get healthy, all of a sudden, what do you think about? A salad. And oh my God, don't even put dressing on. This is going to be lettuce. And, vegetables are fantastic and fruit are fantastic, but they're not nutrient-dense foods. Those are when you do that, you step back 5 million years. I mean, it's exactly what you've done. What we have always focused on with these technologies is getting the most amount from our environment into a state that our bodies can make use of it. And this is, I think, a really important paradigm shift that, and really weird and ironic that now that our focus is on nutrient-free foods, really is what it is, we have never been more unhealthy, right? And there was a study done several years ago, and I talk about it all the time, that I forget the exact specifics, but whoever did this study went around to a bunch of supermarkets, modern American grocery stores, and looked at all the packaged food and documented what was advertised on this food. And 80-something% of the packaged food advertised and boasted about what it didn't have in it. Sugar-free, fat-free, gluten-free, calorie-free, whatever free it was. And again, the idea is okay, well, some of these things we probably shouldn't have in our bodies. But the more important message is, what are we thinking? What's going through our brains when we're figuring out how to deciding what we should be eating or what we should be feeding our families? It's what the food doesn't have in it, so I can just eat all day long, right? And the focus of what I'm trying to do is to look back into the past and say, okay, we need to get the most amount of all of our food as possible. And if we do that, if we literally change that, shift that paradigm back to the way that it was in the past, so many things, problems that are facing us today will start to not necessarily completely resolve themselves, but they'll start to be addressed. Things like sustainability, human-environmental relationships, human-to-human relationships, and obviously a relationship with our own health.
So I'm going to make this personal and about me. I mean, I have some friends here who haven't seen me in a while. I've lost a little bit of weight, slimmed up, I've been on a diet, went on some kind of version of South Beach, but like for the first 3 weeks, I wanted to kill a small deer. So people thought I was rather tense. Is that a healthy thing that wanting to go and, the aggression that I sort of felt towards anything that might walk by? I mean, so I'm interested in, because you just talked about our diets and,
Sure.
and how we're screwed up. And I just sort of, what would be the Bill Schindler modern diet with the food evolution revolution be?
That's a great question. No, it's very healthy to want to
kill a small deer.
Well, I guess it's at some level, but really in some ways, and more than just nutritionally, that idea. One of the things that I love about hunting is that connection. I've been hunting since I could, just about walk. I've always, never enjoyed killing in any form, but I've always felt this, need to be connected to the entire system from start to finish. So there's something very important about that beyond just the nutritional piece. In my mind, if we take it real quick, if we take a step back and look at the dietary trends through time that begin at 3.5 million years ago when we create these first tools.
Right.
At that moment, what was introduced to our diet is meat.
Right.
For the first time ever. Now, when we talk about animals today in our diets, we always default to the term meat. They're almost synonymous in the way that we talk about animals in our diet. And that's a real problem. And it doesn't tell the whole story. When we do, and right around the same time this tool is first created, we start to find butchering sites, definite butchering sites, which look like we're scavenging from other animals. So we're getting meat. And when you look at how predators on the savannah, we study modern predators to understand how predators in the past would have operated. They'll go out and kill something, gorge themselves on everything on the inside, and then go off and sleep in a tree for a while, which gives people like humans or our ancestors a little bit of time to go in and hack pieces off. And that's exactly what we were doing. There's not much of a change biologically at that time. There's not a huge jump in brain size, not a huge jump in body size with the introduction of meat into our diet. The big change comes 2 million years ago when we begin to hunt. The conversation shouldn't just be focused on meat. It should be focused on the entire animal. So the major change, a huge jump in brain size, a huge jump in body size, exponentially in both cases, is when we begin to hunt, because the difference is we have first access to the most nutrient-dense part of an animal at that point. The organs, the blood, the fat, the connective tissue, the brains, these sorts of things. So meat is more nutrient-dense than vegetables and fruit, certainly, but it is the least nutrient-dense part of an animal. It's the insides that are the biggest part. So hunting and cooking began at 2 million years ago, which were both transformative. And then from that time forward, we just continue to do all these things a little bit better. We're hunting better, we're fishing better, we're trapping better, we're fermenting things, we're cooking better, we're doing all sorts of things. So, and all of those things, again, focus on nutrient density. So when you say what is a modern diet, to me, one of the things that I think we need to reintroduce is not massive amounts of meat. We probably eat more meat than we should anyhow as modern Americans, but we don't eat enough animal. We eat too much meat, but not enough animal. And
That's a tweetable moment.
on a nutritional level, that's huge.
Shake up your followers. So what in the heck does that mean?
So that means, we eat, as modern Americans, we eat around 50% of a cow and 55% of a pig by weight. Where indigenous groups around the world would eat upwards of 95, 96, 97% of the animals that they kill. So from a nutritional perspective, we're missing 50% of the weight of an animal, but what that half provides in vitamins and calories and fat is more than half of the other part that we typically do consume. And this is, again, that's the nutritional side. From an ethical level, from an ethical perspective, if we kill an animal and eat half of it and the rest of it goes to trash or to make soap or to animal feed, that there's a real problem with that. But when we kill an animal and eat the entire thing, literally nose to tail, we address, again, those issues of dietary, nutritional issues, but also some ethical issues. And then we start thinking about things like sustainability, and then small farmers doing wonderful things with their animals can sell the entire animal. There's a whole lot of things shift when our focus on animals shift. And that's a key piece. I mean, it really is. So
let me ask you a question just culturally. I mean, in the modern day, I've spent a lot of time, as you know, in China, and my gut tells me that in China, they eat a lot more of the animal than we do, because I see it over there in the markets all over. I know that Maryland, for instance, exports, I don't know if Donald Trump has gotten to this yet, but exports tons of chicken feet. Like, chicken feet go from Maryland like crazy to China. It's a huge export for the state of Maryland. I don't know if you guys know that. Just don't tell President Trump, because we might, shut it down. But I guess my question is, from a cultural perspective and almost geopolitically, do you see other countries of the world that are doing what you said? Does China eat more of the animal than we do? And does that result in them having an overall better health track than we do? Because I'm not sure that's the case, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I can't speak directly to the overall health and how it's impacted in a place.
I'll just send you pictures of the parts of the animal they sell.
My picture is, yes, many countries do better than us. In Ireland, they do better than us. In Italy, they do a lot better than us. There's traditions that have persisted in some of these places, and a lot of them were just based on necessity over time, right? And now, so much has shifted, and there's a lot of reasons why it shifted. And there's 250 years of looking down on immigrant groups that have come in, and we're eating the entire animal, and immigrant groups looking to us, looking to other people who were, maybe wealthier and the kinds of parts of animals that they were eating, and discarding some traditional, ways of approaching animals. And it's just completely transformed. And now we're stuck with eating the lean cuts of an animal and throwing the rest of it away. And it's ridiculous. We should have been looking at the immigrant groups coming in, because they were doing something a lot better than many of us in place were already doing. So there is a cultural issue, though, with it now. I mean, we are several generations removed in many families from seeing liver or heart or blood or fat on the table. It is. And if you put this in front of somebody now, it seems very, very strange. It seems strange in the way it looks, the way it smells, the way it tastes. And we have lost the information how to actually cook these things to make them meet our modern expectations. The thing is, if it's done right, these foods are absolutely beautiful. And it's not just about organs, but that's the piece that we're talking about here. We can say the same, that same sort of approach we can use for milk and for grains as well. Like,
I know you're like obsessively opposed to pasteurized milk, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I know to push that button.
You gotta
Why?
We have, so there's a lot, when I go and speak or teach in different places, I get asked a lot, what should we be eating, right? It's one thing. But I also get asked specifics like, should modern humans be eating bread? Should we be drinking milk, as adults? Because we're the only species on the planet that doesn't. It's a fairly new thing. And a lot of this is stemming from a lot of the, that push in the paleo world now, where, bread and milk are sort of no-nos.
But you brought some bread over here.
I brought some bread, and I did.
My friend Steve Oriole definitely.
Don't touch it yet, but in a minute we can all, in a little bit we can all have it.
Yeah.
And I don't have answers.
Right.
But I think I'm asking the right questions. And when we talk about bread and milk, or bread and dairy in general, grains and dairy in general, we may have to make sure we ask the right questions. So should humans be eating bread is a ridiculous statement, right? Because the bread that I brought over there and a loaf of bread that you would buy at the grocery store to make sandwiches from are completely different foods. And immediately that conversation, bread and bread, it's rendered useless. Same thing with milk. Should adult humans be drinking milk from other animals? It's a fairly new thing. I mean, in the realm of 3.5 million years, we've only been the archaeological evidence suggests we've been drinking milk from other animals for at least 8,000 years. So compared to, our perception of time, that's a long time. But compared to this, it's a very short period of time. And again, the question is sort of strange to just say, or ridiculous to just say milk. Because if you're talking about a ultra pasteurized milk at the grocery store, or a fermented raw milk that just came out of a cow 2 days earlier and is fermented for 2 days, they're completely different foods, and our bodies do completely different things from them. And when somebody asks a question like that, my answer is, well, let's look at what has happened. What's the trend over time in the past? And the trend, or the one that I think has been good for us, is we find technologies and behaviors that allow us to extract the most amount of digestible nutrition from the resources in front of us.
So let me ask you a naive question. How many of you saw Bill as the star in the loincloth on the Savannah Plain in the Great Human Race? So it's only some of you. I mean, how many of you didn't see it? So it's a great series to see. So it's on National Geographic, and it's fascinating. I pulled up a bunch of things like crunchy scorpion, all these things that you were kind of eating. It will challenge your sensibilities, we'll say. But you look like you were doing great. You were surviving. It was an interesting show. But I began to worry in it about times, like when you hadn't eaten food and you had, animals going after you. And I'm going to ask a naive question just about human development and animal development. Other animals out of Savannah do eat meat. We're eating. Why didn't their brains get big and they beat us when we were the weak creature with small brains and not thinking and barely surviving? Why didn't lions or cheetahs become the big deal?
That's a great question. So it's not, I don't have the answer, but it's a great question. This is how
because they were getting nutrient.
They were getting
food.
Tons of nutrients.
You would have been nutrient-rich food for something.
I sure would have, but I came close to times already. Our brain growth and body growth is not a result of the nutrients that we unlocked. It was supported by the nutrients that we unlocked. And there's still a lot of questions. What pushed our brain development? What allowed our brains to grow and push it to grow? And then again, that was obviously supported by dietary change. And nobody knows that answer. There's a lot of people suggesting things. I mean, there's suggestions everywhere from hallucinogenic drugs millions of years ago that allowed us to first, think outside of the box, to increase. There's actually some very strong theories surrounding that. And if you look at some of the earliest forms of art that our ancestors made, it's in geometric designs that many people suggest are very similar to if you're on hallucinogenic drugs, if you're tripping, that you would see, which is fascinating. But whether or not that's true, I have no idea. But it could be something as simple as, increased group size, which is one of the most brain taxing things. Creating and maintaining human relationships seems to be one of the most taxing things that our brains can do. And we see it now in the world of social media. How much time and energy do we spend doing such things? So there was something prompting our bodies and brains to grow. And at the same time, we were creating a diet or diets that supported that at the same time. And
honestly, when I was watching you, what came to mind, which was depressing because I love the book, but the story was just horribly terrible, was this story Into the Wild, the John Krakauer book about the young boy that went off and he was a wild spirit, ended up going to Alaska. He's a lot like you, eat berries, eat a moose, and I don't know if you remember the story, but he ended up reading the wrong thing. Yeah. So your wife is here. How often have you stumbled across the wrong thing?
Knock on wood, I never have, but I've been very, very, very careful.
But I mean, part of you is that you were telling me that it's took mankind millions of years to evolve with food, to test, to sort of find a way, and that it was complicated and dangerous.
And it still is complicated because so I understand we are one of, if not the only animal that eats plants that doesn't consume dirt on a regular basis. And that may seem unrelated.
Should we?
But well, absolutely. So it's called geophagy. We used to think of it as a eating disorder, but it turns out we derive a lot of nutrition from eating earth. And there's some groups around the world that still do. Definitely, we know they did in the past, and it's typically something that's done by pregnant and lactating women who have an increased nutritional need, or children who have an increased nutritional need. But the other thing that geophagy does is help detoxify certain plants when you consume it at the same time, and that's why other animals do it. So it's a very, the addressing our modern way of eating and issues with dietary health. It's not a simple thing to just say, go back and eat this and this and this, because this is a great example of how complicated it can be. That if you're going to eat that plant, you probably need to eat dirt at the same time. And now we're getting into some strange, sort of discussions that are not just strange, but important. So
what is your, what did you have for dinner last night?
what do we have for dinner last night?
Hot dogs.
Actually, okay,
Monday night, yeah,
Monday night we had a great guy by the name of Brian Sanders. He has a podcast and is doing a documentary called Food Lies. And he and his crew flew out from LA. Food Lies. And LIES.
That's what I thought you said, just trying to figure that out.
It's brilliant,
Yeah,
this documentary. And he and his crew came out and filmed at the food lab for half the day and then back at the house for half the day. So when he came back to the house, my son and I were butchering a deer, and we cooked venison and lacto fries. So lacto fries are fermented, we cut up the potatoes, fermented them for several days, and then we cook them in high quality animal fat.
Sounds delicious, actually. And is that I am.
You saw the pictures?
I mean, part of the reason there's a lot of interest is you're trying to bring. I mean, I'm sort of looking at this skull, and I don't know if we're going to get to it. Is this one of us?
That's one of our ancestors. That's
one of our ancestors.
Safarensis, I believe.
Was this a baby? Was this a?
No, that's.
Yeah.
I mean, this is.
So this was the
full-grown
size of
adult,
our.
Stood about maybe that tall.
That's how big we were before we were getting nutrients.
Well, we were getting nutrients, but nutrients should just support a body of this size.
Wow.
Our brains make up 2% of our body, but require 20% of the nutrition we take in to fuel.
Wow.
Which is huge. So every fifth meal that we eat is to solely power our brain. I mean, and so to see what's crazy too, as well, is when you look at if we had the full, dentition, all the teeth on this individual here, and compared it to our teeth, their teeth were bigger. So when you think about it, especially the molars where you get a lot of food processing going on, teeth are getting smaller, and guts, as soon as we stand upright 5 million years ago, our guts shrink by almost half. And these are really interesting things to see, because the only major thing that we possess that physically breaks down food on our bodies really are our teeth. And in our guts, the amount of time that food sits in our guts and the way our guts operate, the size of our guts, says a lot, or is directly related to how much we can break food down, right? So, we could go outside and eat all the grass out here that we wanted, but we would starve to death. But a cow can support a body of its size because the way that they chew the grass, but also because of the arrangement and size of their digestive tract. Ours shrink. So at the same time that our teeth and are shrinking and our guts are shrinking and all these other things are happening anatomically, our brains are growing. The most expensive organ in the body is growing, and that really speaks to the power of the technologies that we're using and developing and the behavior patterns we're developing to get more and more nutrients in a state. We pre-process our food before we eat it. Everything from fermentation to blenders to cooking to all those things, pre-processed food. And that's what we do really well. And that's where the nutrient density comes from.
Archer Daniels Midland, Cargill, giant mega food processors. Tell us what you think of them.
Put me on the spot, huh? I think we can do a much better job. And I think see, when we break this down and look at the conversation, we ask the right questions and look at the conversation the right way and say, okay, if we're really looking at food security, if we're really looking at increased human nutrition and diet and health and sustainability and all of those sorts of things that people like who you mentioned are using to say we need to genetically modify this crop so it can grow bigger and we can pack them in tighter and do all these things, that entire conversation falls apart as well. Because what we should be focusing on and thinking about is what are we doing to those grains in this case from when it starts in the field, between when it goes in the field and it goes into our mouth. Because if you take that grain and grind it and make a quick sandwich bread is made in an hour, start to finish, from flour to in the package, 1 hour. Those loaves of bread over there on that table took me about a day and a half to make. And through that time, this long, slow fermentation, those grains change. And they're not only are the nutrients unlocked, but it becomes more nutrient dense. So questions, we're having all these conversations about how many plants can we pack together into a field and all these sorts of things. And then we're stripping them of their nutrients by the time they get to our mouths. The conversation should be, what can we do with what we have and increase the nutrients
So-
as much as possible.
Not to be a stickler on this, but don't you run into scaling problems? If we were to scale the Schindler family and the Schindler processing of food, I mean, it raises the interesting question. I won't be obnoxious and say, can everyone live that way? But just take a quarter of the population and live that way. I mean, I think part of the reason why, out where we have homes in the Eastern Shore of Maryland, and you see Dow and others with these, giant crops with, there are GMO, genetically modified crops that are out there. And part of it is, creating this mass scale of food production for markets out there. So it just raised the interesting question that, you do have a bit of a cult following now and everyone wants to eat crickets. But I think at the end of the day, can you take we're here in Washington, D.C.
Right.
This is a policy town. What sorts of things should we be thinking about scaling some of the lessons that you found? Is that possible?
So you brought up a bunch of good points. The first one is around where we live on the Eastern Shore, we can drive for hours and see fields the entire time.
Yes.
But probably not one of those fields is growing food for humans, which is fascinating, right? They're growing food for animals.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the interesting things about when you think about, and I promise to get to the scalability thing, but when you think about how we as humans have dealt with animals for food, up until modern times, it's always been, we're using animals, and this is going to sound crass, but bear with me for a minute, because we use animals as factories to take food that humans can't derive nutrition from. It's one of these technologies, right? And turn it into food that we can derive nutrition from. Milk, blood, meat, organs, whatever.
Right.
Fat. And now what we do, and that worked really well when we did this, but now we take animals and feed them food that we can derive nutrition from. And then there's this huge battle. What are we growing on this field? What are we? And it's a completely different argument. So number one, that's a huge problem. As far as the scalability is concerned, the first thing I think we need to do, and this is what I'm pushing very hard for, is reconnect people with their food. And right here at the Hill Center is a great example of doing such things. Everybody is not going to forage for. I say everybody needs to be a hunter-gatherer, and we don't have the resources to fully do this. And when I say it, I mean we should engage in it at some level, at some times. And by doing so, we see the world in a completely different way. So here at the Hill Center, I've been doing an urban foraging tour now. I don't know how many years, five or 6 years. And I love this course. And we come here and we start in the kitchen downstairs and we walk through DC for several
Urban
hours.
foraging, is that like
foraging.
dumpster diving?
No. It's going into vacant lots, cracks in sidewalks, park, whatever. We go all the way down to the Capitol. We forage on the Capitol grounds. I don't know if it's legal, but we do it. Well, at least up until now. Right now, we're not going to be able to do it. So we go and we spend several hours foraging, and then come back and we cook everything that we foraged here in the kitchen. And I love this class. I do a lot of foraging classes. I do a lot of them in the woods. I do a lot on the Eastern Shore. But I love this one in particular because it gives the people that are here in the class an opportunity to walk the sidewalks on the streets here and see it through a completely new set of eyes. Now, the people that are here doing it and live here cannot live the entire year on the weeds coming up out of the cracks of the sidewalks, even though they are much more nutrient dense than anything you could buy at the supermarket. But the point isn't that. The point is you've connected and you've looked at that weed in a different way. And you've thought about the lettuce in the grocery store possibly in a different way. And we thought about seasonality in a different way. And most importantly, when we come back, we cook everything and you see that it can become really good, delicious, amazing food. So can we all become foragers on a daily basis? No, there's not enough resources. But doing it once or twice a year, going collecting acorns with your kid, whatever it is hugely important. Hunting, fishing, trapping, clamming, whatever it is, doing that, again, is reconnecting and making you see the world and your grocery stores in a different way. So that's one part of I think, where we need to go. The second
Who
part.
wants to sign up for the foraging class?
It's a good class.
It's fascinating. I want to go find a. Yeah.
Meat? No. It's just vegetables. This is just vegetables.
Yeah.
But I say, but the other piece is this. So, on a more, I don't want to say practical level, on a level that will feed your family.
Right.
That's a more theoretical perception
Right.
level. But on a more practical level, and this is getting to the scalability piece. I think one of the best things that we can do, and one of the best things you can do in your own home and with your own families is cook everything you eat from scratch at least once. Period. Once. Just do it. Do it all the time if you can, but do it once. Now, we don't have the time necessarily. It's one of the major resources we're lacking in modern America, but doing it once will transform the way you see the grocery store. And all the things in the aisle that you see in the packages and all this, you walk into a grocery store and you will see it through a completely new set of eyes. And at least, if you're not going to make sourdough bread every day, every week for your family, or do it, which I completely understand, you at least go in the grocery store and you can support the people who are doing things, in my mind, the right way with what you put into your cart and what you pay with your checkbook.
So Bill, now you're on a journey. So you're doing this out on the Eastern Shore, and we all know the stories of the hunting. And now that you did National Geographic, going to Africa, and you're a pop star of evolutionary food. And now you have the Eastern Shore Food Lab. Maybe it might be nice to talk about what you're trying to achieve with that food lab. And I wasn't joking when I asked, is there going to be a Bill Schindler cookbook or a Bill Schindler guide to urban foraging someday, or something like that? Because it does seem to me that you're on a mission to try to proselytize and to bring people into a different way of thinking about their interaction with food. So what made the food lab happen?
So the Eastern Shore Food Lab at Washington College, which is where I teach.
So those of you, not everybody here may know Washington. Washington College was founded in 1782, first liberal arts college in the country, not derived from England. George Washington was on the board. It's cool. It's 90 minutes away. You should come down to it's across the bay, and it's a really, really interesting old colonial town. And so at this place, you've kind of brought a surprising new venture.
Right. So one of the great things about Washington College is it's a small private liberal arts college. It's absolutely wonderful. I've been teaching there for 10 years, and we are very, very focused. We have a very strong environmental focus. We're uniquely situated right on the Chester River. We were just gifted a 5,000-acre farm right in the next county over, which we have grandiose plans for, and working directly with the Center for Environment and Society, which is a wonderful center at the college. It's been operating there for, I think, 12 or 13 years now, focused on the environment. And now our new venture is the Eastern Shore Food Lab. And the idea here is we started planting the seed for it about 8 or 9 years ago when I first got there. I saw the value in teaching not only my students at Washington College, but members of the community, all about all sorts of life, the past, human environmental relationships, diet, nutrition, all this through food. And the cool thing about teaching through food is that you're using all of your senses all of the time. And it ends in a great meal as well. So I started pushing this idea that, we really need a kitchen, a fully operational kitchen where not only, our students can come from, and the idea is this: the students at Washington College, we're not producing chefs that are going to open up a restaurant, although if we do, that's fantastic. But the idea is we have a great liberal arts program. And in my mind, one of the best things that we can do is have students from every single major, every single discipline come through our doors, work in the Eastern Shore Food Lab, start to finish, understand the world that they live in through food, from working on a farm to butchering animals to curing meat to making cheese to foraging to fermenting, all of it, and then go back to their majors and do what they do with a new set of eyes, right? And see the world through this new set of eyes. And whether they're going to be teachers or lawyers or work in government or policy, whatever it is that they do, this gives them a huge leg up, and I think is truly, truly important. And then what I kept saying to the board and the administration is, and even if they do none of that, but they go home and feed their families in a wonderful way, then we've done our job, and that's great. So it's a beautiful space there for the community and for the students.
Why shouldn't we be more ambitious in the sense that, when I think out there, we're in the Chesapeake Bay, and there's been a fight over, with waterfowl hunters over oyster beds, right? So oysters used to be the big deal in the Chesapeake, and they're endangered. It's hard to bring them back. Or when you look at, I saw a bunch of wild turkeys the other day, and I'm thinking about you, and I said, glad you weren't around because I like those wild turkeys. And but you would want to see a lot more. And there used to be such an abundance of these things, and raise the question beyond food of going back and doing something more ambitious when it comes to replenishing, the wildness meat. What we have are massive chicken farms, right? I don't even know if we call them a farm, but chicken houses, yeah, and the runoff and all of this. I mean, are there things that grow when you think about the environment and environmental stewardship and the bounty that used to exist sort of wildly around us that we ought to also be putting on the agenda?
Oh, and it certainly is. So we have a strong focus on wild foods as well. We do First Friday foraging now on for community events at the Food Lab, as well as obviously work with the students. But we're very focused on wild animal resources and dealing with them properly as well. And this speaks to exactly what you mentioned. Even with those turkeys, one of the things that is very bothersome to me is the way that, I love hunting. I think it's an amazing way to reconnect with your entire food system. And I love, my son and I hunt all the time, and it's a great time that we spend together for all those wonderful, wonderful reasons as well. But one of the evils of hunting is the way that we treat the animals after we've harvested them. I did a study with a wonderful biologist at the college, Aaron Krochmal, several years ago, and we were responding to an archaeological problem. But it says a lot as well. Speaks a lot about how deer hunters work with deer. We harvested 13 deer, males and females, different ages, and weighed them, took them apart piece by piece, every single part of the animal. We had an amazing graduate or a senior that was working with us as well, helping us with most of the work. Took these animals apart, weighed every single piece, took every bit of bone marrow out of every single bone. We took all the connective tissue, the fat, all of it. And we took all the meat that a typical hunter in North America keeps, which is the same amount, percentage as the pigs, and it mimics each other, and put it aside. And what was left over, we figured out the caloric equivalent, what it represented. And for an average size white-tailed deer, depending on your caloric intake, provided the stuff that's left over, that's wasted, thrown away, provides 13 to 31 days worth of food from one deer. And that's with deer. And with geese and duck and birds in general, most of the time people just breast them out and throw the rest of it away. Guts, legs, the whole thing. And this is a real problem. And part of it is just tradition. And this is, you grew up in a family that's hunting geese, then you learn from your dad or your granddad or whoever that you breast them out, and that's what you do. And this is a huge problem. And we have a ton of food getting thrown away. So the issue, I have no issue with hunting whatsoever. I think it's something we should be doing in a very ethical way. And it's probably one of the most important things that we can do in a very ethical way. But it's what happens after we kill that animal. What should we do? So one of the big things we're focusing on is teaching people how to properly butcher animals after they've been harvested and cook those foods. To me, if you're going to throw something away from a goose, throw its breast away. Keep the legs, keep the livers, keep the heart. I mean, those are the best parts of it anyhow. Teach people how to make goose leg confit, for example. And that will help, I think, a lot with what you're talking about.
I want to go to all of you and have you share your experiences and ask Bill questions. But before I do that, how many of you live inside the city of Washington, so within the city limits? And I know there's some deer down in Rock Creek, but I wouldn't recommend going to hunt them. You might end up in the slammer. But I'm interested in what thoughts you have for people who don't live out on the Eastern Shore next to a river, who may not have the proximity to this. What are the kinds, as they think about their own dietary, course, would you recommend that they can do to enrich that in a way that would fit with your revolutionary revolution?
So we have a couple rules in our house. Yeah. And well, first off, please again understand, I'm married to a wonderful woman. Where's she?
Yes,
Christine
right
in the
there.
back. We both have careers.
Was he hard to deal with when you got married? I mean, was this all easy for you?
She should have known. She should have known. There were a lot of signs early.
Yeah.
So we both have careers. We have 3 kids, and they have lives and sports and horseback and all of it. And we are trying to manage, these things that I think are very important for us on both dietary and philosophical levels, certainly, and living in a modern Western world, right? And in modern times. And it's not, this is why I keep saying it's not about eating like a caveman. It's about learning to eat like humans again. It is not going back and just eating this diet that we think, supported us for 300,000 years. Even if I knew what that was, and it's no one diet. I mean, we're talking about tons of diversity over time and over miles, but the basics of those diet are very important. Keeping those things in mind and still living in our modern life is where I think we really need to go. And that's what most of this is focused on. So one thing that we can do immediately is, again, that reconnection piece, whatever way that we can. And also through, again, foraging, even if it's once a year, or fishing, even if it's once a year, and cooking from scratch, even if it's once, cooking everything that you eat at least once. And you get that sort of intimate connection. But I also think one of the most important things we can do is put a face with the animal. I truly believe most vegans and vegetarians and people that believe the same way that I do have a lot more in common than we have differences. We really care about the environment. We really care about diet and health. We really care about the life of an animal. And one of the things that's been a huge problem in modern society, especially the modern Western world, is we've been too distant, this visceral insulation, they call it, from animals, raising the animals, harvesting the animals, butchering the animals. And if nothing else, we need to start bringing entire chickens into our house. I mean, it's true, the whole chicken, go to the store and buy the whole chicken. They're harder and harder to find anymore. Bring the whole chicken and butcher a chicken. It's a very manageable thing to do, even if you live, wherever you live. And you start to remember that an animal gave its life for us. And on top of that, you have almost that entire animal there to do all sorts of things.
How did we get so prissy about this stuff? One of the questions I have is, I'm sort of obsessed with everything colonial era, and I came across, and I don't know if it's through you or someone, but I came across an old colonial era cookbook of someone from the Eastern Shore, and it had something, I'm going to get this wrong, something like goose blood pie or something like that. And when you went through and read the ingredients and what they did, it kind of grossed me out. So but it was fascinating. It's exactly what you're saying. I mean, very much in black and white. And, this was grandma's back then, holiday favorites. And none of it appealed to me. How did my crowd get so spoiled and prissy and distant from that kind of cooking? And then we'll go to all of you.
It's been generations. I mean, we just have been truly insulated from it. And we've almost prided ourselves on the fact that we don't have to deal with it. Somebody else deals with it. And that comes at a huge cost. It comes at a cost to our health. It comes at a cost to our environment. And it certainly comes at a cost to the animals as well. So all of the atrocities that are happening now in the way that, these big, concentrated animal feeding operations, or, all of that is happened behind our backs while we were looking the other way because we were, proud and thrilled that we didn't have to deal with it.
Well, let me open up the floor to questions and comments. Are we doing microphones or will I do? Okay, terrific. Yes, right here to the right, since you're in my blind spot. I went right from my blind spot. Yeah.
To answer Steve's question, one of the things as you economically rise up and become more well off is that you eat high off the hog. Yeah. And that means you eat less of the innards and offal and the blood and things. You eat that tenderloin, which there's not a lot of in animal, or you eat the duck breast or whatever. And
so high off, that's what high off the hog meant.
Yes, literally away from the feet, the stomach, and the offal. And so that is, everyone's trying to climb that economic ladder. And so that's part of our tradition where we lose that immigrant, the eat whatever you can because you need the food to, you're going to just eat the more elite, expensive cuts. And we see that archaeologically through historical archaeological sites. And it's pretty much the way we've evolved into our 20th century, 21st century culture.
It really does fit. Yesterday I was in Florida, and I, not to bore you with this, I spoke to a group, it had to do with foreign policy, but I spoke to about 300 octogenarians. And I mentioned that I was coming to do this with you, and I told them a little bit about what your story is. And what's fascinating is when you're talking to people that are 80 or 90 years old, and they are recounting what their grandparents and great-grandparents ate and did, it's an incredibly interesting, I mean, I got a lot a lot of stuff in like half an hour. I couldn't. I wanted to run away. But it was interesting, and there's this reservoir of these experiences out there that really track with what you've been sharing. And I have to say, it's so alien to me. I feel so distant from it, but I'm also intrigued. I'm sort of like, want to eat the bone marrow. Apparently better than you had it.
So we did this event almost exactly a year ago in Ireland, and we made fermented butter. So but it's very possible that butter was first invented in Ireland about 6,000 years ago and then spread by the Vikings. A lot of people are claiming it, but it's possible it was there. And
the Irish invented, the Vikings marketed it?
It sounds like. However, butter has always been, even in historic times, a very live food.
Right.
You would take raw cream and you'd collect it over several days. It would ferment, and which helps it make the butter anyhow. And then you would churn it into butter. And what you end up with is something that is probiotic rich, like a high quality yogurt or a kefir, a completely live food. I would gather that there's probably a handful of people in all of DC that have eaten butter like it was made in the past. You will tonight, because I brought it here. So we made it in Ireland. And to make butter in Ireland was a cool thing anyhow, because they just make amazing butter still today. But we made this butter, and we had a big event with a good friend of mine I was working with, Jason O'Brien, who does fermented sourdough breads, and I did the butter. And people were coming through, 70, 80, 90-year-old people. They try it, and they look up, and they said, I haven't had this taste since I was a kid.
Wow. Oh, that's kind of the story I heard last night. Yes, hi.
Close. Okay. Too close. Thank you very much. I grew up in Texas, and hunting is not a problem for me if you use the full animal, but I want to acknowledge that my other white friends, and I want to look around the audience here, who's missing? We're white. Let's just say it. We're white. We're privileged. We come from that aspect, and I'm working with a lot of food justice issues. My friends who hunt, it's the breast meat, all the problems you're talking about, fermentation from a Norwegian family. My family knows all that. My grandfather, built his own house, electrical engineer in the city, farming, etc. So I want to own my privilege here and ask ourselves, what do we do to reach out to the community? And I live in DC now. Food deserts. I've stood in line with mobile markets where they're trying to reconnect that, whether it's the Michael Pollan perspective of eat food, not too much, mostly plants, eat food, what your grandparents identify as food. But I've stood in line with folks who have lost that connection, even with grandparents' ideas of food, recipes, etc. We come from a place of privilege where we can have access to you, to us, to Hill Center. How do we reach our local communities and reconnect them to that land, growing food, understanding fermentation, understanding the whole food process and the connection to all the elements of that and the nutrition and the benefits from that? What advice do you have for that?
Thank you.
Sorry, that was long. I
Yeah.
apologize.
No, it's okay.
It's probably one of the most important things we could bring up the entire night, because it's not about the people in this room, it's about all of us. And I certainly don't have an answer for that, but it's something we're struggling with in a very good way, even at the Eastern Shore Food Lab. And one of the first things that we did was start to meet with all representatives of the local community. We're in the midst of it, but we started already meeting with all the representatives of the local community, because that's exactly what we want to do. It is a problem for all of us. And it's something, when I say, again, this whole idea of eating like humans again, it's about not just the nutrition, it's about all of it. It's about community. It's about all of us as humans. And it was mind-blowing to me. One of the first things, and I certainly don't have a direct answer, but I can tell you that it is certainly on our radar, and it should be on all of ours. One of the first things when the Eastern Shore Food Lab started to become a reality, I started pushing for it. I said, we need to put the Eastern Shore Food Lab in the middle of town, not on campus, because there's a lot of members of our community who have never stepped foot on campus, third, fourth generation, never stepped foot on campus. And I sort of patted, and there's a big lesson here, I sort of patted myself on the back that I won that battle, and I'm thinking about it, and it's there. And then I met with a local representative of the African American community in Chestertown, and I told him that. He said, you didn't do anything. And I said, what do you mean? I put it down. He says, black people don't come to this part of town. he says, you're going to have to work really, really hard. And his advice was starting with the churches. And so it is a huge struggle, and it's something that we definitely have to do. But I will say that idea of trying to put people back into the kitchen and make the most amount of whatever resources they have access to is a huge step in the right direction. I really believe that it is.
I just want to add something. Your point about community and diversity is so important, and I am pulling up something here because we did something. The Atlantic did an event in Los Angeles recently called the Sustainability Summit. We had about 400 people there, and it was every part of the community you could imagine, incredibly diverse. But a couple of people really stole the show, and I want to mention them in this, and it's online if you guys are interested in the subject. Not about nutrition and whatever, but it was about, in one case, a man named Ron Finley is a gardener and activist. He has something called the Ron Finley Project, and he lived in inner city, eastern Los Angeles, and he began to go out and grow his own vegetables and gardens and bananas and pineapples, and he tried to create an urban oasis around his home in eastern LA, in the sort of tougher areas of town. And of all places, the city of Los Angeles tried to tell him he couldn't use the median strips, which are, of course, pretty crappy. And they were going to arrest him over this. This then became a huge cause, and it has now become something where he's creating kind of a garden movement through it. I mean, he's a very wonderful, outrageously, he's African American. He is speaking to an entire different community and bringing that in, and it's, I find, so inspirational. Then there's another person, and outside of this area, which I interviewed Ron, but also a woman named Kamal Ahmad, and she's the founder and CEO of something called Copia. And what she had been at Berkeley and come out, and she had met a veteran who had not, his benefits were not starting yet, and he was hungry. He hadn't eaten 3.5 days. And she bought him lunch, and she kind of heard the story. But then she's a numbers and algorithm and an app person out of Berkeley, and became obsessed with connecting food waste, or the food production of food waste, to people in places that need it. And she's now delivering the scale of what Copia does is enormous in cities all around the country. So it's a similar, it's the same pulse of connecting people to food, but also making them aware of food waste, but also realizing that the other dimensions. So I just want to tell you that I think that there are these interesting movements around there. By all means, all of this needs to be scaled, and we're always fighting essentially our own ignorance and lack of knowledge. I had never heard of any of this before we did the program, but I think it's really inspiring to look at the people who are trying to connect on a lot of different things. Food waste is an enormous contributor, for instance, to climate change. And when you look at, that's before you get to the issue of people starving. But, the food waste element is an enormous contributor to CO2 emissions. So, but let's go to others. Steve Oriole. Oh, you didn't have a question. Okay, John. Yeah. Sorry.
I find this fascinating, and I happen to be someone who was really deep into the intense hippie countercultural movement back in the day, and I
always wondered about that.
I'm going to get around to psychedelic drugs in a minute, but I happened to go to Reed College for a semester or two, and Steve Jobs was there around the same time, and then I went to Santa Cruz. And what it is we were obsessed with two topics. One was food and alternative diets, macrobiotic, growing your own food, organic and vegan, and two is that spiritual quest, which would involve the topic I was surprised you brought up the psychedelic side. That means visible soul, I think, in ancient Greek. And how do you see the quest for physical health, body, so to speak, and then the spiritual quest that we're all on inevitably somehow, it seems, especially in terms of that psychedelic drug that you talked about? Because that was a big topic for a lot of us.
And you got Steve Jobs in there, and Steve Jobs' wife owns my magazine. So very, very interesting how all this comes around. Yeah.
I can't speak at all to drugs, but other than caffeine and alcohol, I've never tried any drugs in my life. But I will say that they're connected. They're definitely connected. And what I haven't noticed until recently is that, not necessarily the drug piece, but that the spiritual quest at the same time. I have been so tunnel vision focused on the food aspect of it that I've lost sight of. I thought that I've lost sight of that other piece, but it turns out that when I dove at the level that I have into all of this, it's addressed all of it, at the same time. And really, again, it's about, for me, that connection that I feel by being part of the entire system has also fulfilled, many of my truly my spiritual needs. And I can tell you, sitting in the middle of the woods with my son, watching the sun come up, and the woods come alive with a handmade bow, with a stone tip that I made. There is almost nothing more spiritual than that. And then to be able to bring something back and feed my family with it is absolutely amazing. So I don't know if it specifically addressed your question, because I can't speak to the drug piece, but I will say they are intricately connected.
If one of your kids came to you and said, "Daddy, I'm really sorry, but I'm going to be a vegan," would you be able to deal with that?
Actually, my oldest daughter does not eat much meat at all.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So I'm
And
getting a
actually,
nodding.
Christina was a
Fascinating.
vegetarian when
Yeah.
we first met. So, and this actually,
Yeah?
I didn't.
Okay, that's great. Fascinating.
There was a moment when we were dating on the side of Route 1 in Princeton, New Jersey, where we pulled up. I was a bartender, she was a waitress at the Alchemist and Barrister in Princeton. And it was late night. We had stayed longer than after it closed. And we were driving, and it was maybe 2:30 in the morning or so. And there was a car pulled over on the side of the road. And there was a guy laid out on the ground and another guy standing over him and a dead deer in the middle of the road. So we got out, and she was hardcore vegetarian at the time. And this is actually very, very, very important to this entire conversation. So we get out, and no matter what she says, I went over to the guy first. I did. Yes, I did. And we checked out. He was okay. They were musicians that were coming back from playing.
You saw the deer and said, "Yum."
And once we found out, they had called on the ambulance to come for these guys. So there was help coming. And I went over to the deer. So this deer was actually suffering, terribly suffering.
Yeah.
So we went over to the deer, and this deer is in huge. The entire back end was, destroyed, and this deer's suffering more than the guy on the side of the road was. And there was a kid that pulled over. He was an electrician, and I said, and a cop came, and I looked at the police officer and said, "You're going to shoot the deer?" And he said, "No." I said, "What do you mean you're not going to shoot the deer?" He said, "Man, I shot a deer last week, and he pointed to his gun. He said, I'm never going to use this thing again." I'm thinking, okay, can I use it? I said. And he looks at me. He said, "Son, I get." So then I asked the kid. The electrician had a knife, but he cut wire with it all day. So it was the dullest knife ever. And I ended up killing this deer. And the guys got help. And I looked at her, and I said, "Can I put this deer in the trunk?" She had, what kind of car did you have? Stanza or something? Some Stanza. And she's like, "Absolutely
For
not."
those watching online, she had a Nissan Stanza. It was a tiny little
car. So we drive home. It was a Saturday night. We had to work a double the next day. And I'm driving home. We're arguing the entire way. We don't argue. And this was one of our few arguments. And it was from two completely different paradigms. We found out hours later that she thought I wanted to take this deer home and hang its head on the wall. Which I don't have any animals' heads hanging on my walls. I never have. And when I found that out, I told her there was no way anyhow, because one of the antlers had been broken off and was way down the road. But she didn't realize from my perspective, there is an animal that died, and we can get a whole lot of food from this animal. Why throw it in a pit somewhere on the side of the road and cover it with lime? And it was a really interesting conversation, but that was the beginning of this conversation that we were continuously having from a vegetarian and a animal eater's perspective. And I never pushed it, but it was when she was
I
pregnant.
had no idea how deep this was going to go, guys. But
it
let's
is.
take one more question. I'm going to say, because we have a lot of folks watching online, we're going to have another question here. I know that Bill is going to hang out. I think you're going to show us a little bit about this after.
Right, yeah.
But we'll cut the formal program after your question. And I want to, maybe we'll do quickies if we can, if you're not long-winded. We'll get, because you challenged my authority, and I'm going to go with that. So, yeah, go ahead.
I'll try to be short.
Sure.
Dr. Schindler, thank you. I'm Chris Hagedorn. We were in touch earlier today, and it's great to be in touch because this is really powerful stuff, and great job moderating.
Thank you.
One thing I mentioned to you is next month there's a report that will be coming out by the Lancet Commission and the EAT Foundation, a Norwegian foundation, which looks at food, health, planet, and the complex interactions between them. It's the first time this type of 37 scientists coming from around the world focusing on targets to how can we address all three of those topics in a way that gets us to 2030. So I encourage everybody, read the report, because the most important thing you can do is educate yourself and then take action. Congress yesterday, Senate, passed a farm bill. If you haven't read it, well, you're not alone. One congressman was quoted as saying, "This bill will unravel if people actually read what's in it." It is farm welfare. It promotes industrial farming, and it does not subsidize organics. There's no CO2 mitigation. It's a disaster, frankly. But the American public does nothing about it because most people don't read those bills. So anyway, it's great the work you're doing. Thank you. I think
And
maybe
that bill just passed both chambers today and went to the White House today. So
Right.
it's so it actually didn't pass just
Right.
one chamber. It's an $896 billion bill.
But educating those people who might not be so fortunate as we, as the young lady said, we need to get Congress to take action. And McDonald's, after public pressure, reduced its meat, ordering meat that is filled with hormones today. That's a big move. That is because customers are demanding action,
Right.
and more of us need to do the same.
Thank you. Thanks for the comment. Can I give the mic to you, and then I'll give Bill an opportunity to close this out?
Yes.
Thank you. Tell us who you are.
I'm Lauren, and my question is on agriculture, because I understand you have a particular interest in wild plants and, you know, the connection to the environment that provides. But my understanding is that, you know, through our thousands of years of breeding plants, that we have made them more nutrient dense. So depending on how you're defining that, mostly in macros or in vitamins, you know, all the others. So I just wanted to know what your thoughts were on, you know, whatever, wild strawberries versus modern wild broccoli versus the plumper, sweeter version that we get in the supermarket today.
All right, that's
So plant.
all right, I'll do a quick
Yeah,
quick
please.
answer on this. So I do firmly believe, and there's a lot of work that supports this, that the most nutrient dense plants on the planet are wild. And so what we've done in the case of plants for 15,000 years is selectively, select for certain features, traits that we want. And we have been, in essence, genetically modifying at some level for 15,000 years. But rarely have that selective pressure been on for nutrients. It's been for size, it's been for ease of harvest, ease of processing, closeness of the ability to plant plants closer, and it's been at the expense of the nutrients. Most of the plants that we have access to today in the supermarkets are full of three things: air, water, and sugar. So what we need to focus on, one of the things that we need to focus on with agriculture, beyond all the things that we all know in the room that we do need to focus on, is what we do to those plants after they come off the field. I mean, there's so many things we need to deal with for how we're planting and but we know those things. Those are conversations we're having. But what do we do when that plant comes off the field is one of the most important things that we can target and discuss right now, because we have the opportunity through activities like fermentation or nixtamalization or sprouting or soaking grain, all of those sorts of things increase our ability to get nutrition from these plants. And I can actually sort of close a little bit with this as well. We as humans do a terrible job getting food. Biologically, we just can't do it. But what we do is find things in the environment around us and develop ways of getting the most amount of nutrients from them, right? And that's what, the success of our species, the success of our dietary past has been doing just that thing. And now we process food at the expense of the nutrients. We eat a nutrient-free diet, and we're feeling the effects of it. Our planet is, and our bodies are, and our communities are. So I know it seems kind of weird that I'm talking about all these wild things, and the two foods that I made and brought for you are bread and butter. But what they portray, they exemplify several things that I really would like to leave us with. Number one, the changes that we need to make that are going to make the biggest difference in our lives are not these massive things that we do once a month and this big meal and all these others. It's the things that we do every day. It's the foods that we eat every single day. You want to make a change in your kids' diet? Make the bread that they're eating for their sandwiches, because they eat it every single day for their entire time they're in school. I mean, and think about how many times they eat a sandwich at school over their life, and what a little bit of a change in that can do for their health. So number one, it's the everyday thing. That's why I brought bread and butter. But the other reason is because it's something that we think we know. We think we know bread. We think we know butter, but we really don't. The bread and butter that I brought for you, it's a long fermented sourdough bread and a lacto fermented butter. The butter is completely alive and full of probiotics. There's not only flavor there, but our bodies will deal with that bread and that butter in completely different ways than the bread and butter that you can buy in the supermarket. The other really cool thing about that bread and butter is it's something that's very easy to do in your own home. And that's really the key. We can make these
Even for
changes
someone
daily.
like me.
Even for Steve.
Yeah. Hey, Bill, I want to thank. First of all, I want people to remember these catchphrases because they're "Eat like humans" again. The food evolution revolution. They're great. I wish you, we all wish you the very best with the Eastern Shore Food Lab that you're building, and I hope everyone will visit Chestertown and see what you're doing. I want to thank the Hill Center for stretching our minds tonight about this. It's so nice for me. I moderate so many events without any soul at all, and it's nice to be here with all of you on a policy topic. I'm glad to hear people raising things about the Farm Bill. So a big round of applause for Washington College Professor Bill Schindler.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, man. Thank you. Thank you. And goodbye, all the Facebook friends. Okay, let's go see. Yeah.